A pastor rolled up into a school carrying 2 pangas and forcibly removed 2 children. Why did this happen? What does it mean? And what are its implications? Stay tuned to find out. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. I'm Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, and if you're new around here, on this channel we explore South African politics through interviews and analysis. So much going on in our country, but today I want to shed some light on a fascinating and quite shocking story. Tell you exactly what it's about, because you've probably seen the social media visuals, but it's actually a deep, intricate story. And then reflect on what it means about our society and think more deeply about what these images of violence tell us about where South Africa is, where South African schools are, and where South African violence is and how bad it's got. So, like I said, a pastor walked into a school with the security guard carrying a rifle. The pastor himself was carrying a seriously dangerous weapon, and he had another person with him. Why would anyone do this? So let's tell the story. I'm going to start with the background, then go into some of the legal implications, and then finally talk about the social implications. The pastor in question is called Pastor Mboro, otherwise known as Mr. Motswaneng. And he's quite a well-known celebrity pastor operating in the Katlehong area, which is a township in Gauteng near Vosloorus. He has, of course, been a pastor making various theological pronouncements, in fact, setting himself up as a prophet, saying that he has powers of healing, power to change the weather at times, and his message is also about how he can change the fortunes of people's lives. He's commented on a number of issues, from racism in schools to other questions like violence. One of his congregants at some point a few years ago was in a situation where she had a child that died and he was behind trying to hold the paramedics accountable. So he's a pastor in the public eye, but why would a pastor, someone who considers themselves a holy person, roll up in a school with pangas? So the story is that there are 2 children whose mother recently passed away. And the mother was a partner or married to, it's not exactly 100% clear now yet, to Pastor Mboro's nephew. So in other words, Pastor Mboro is related to this young man who he calls his son, or has a close family relationship, more technically his nephew. And this person has 2 children, and his wife or partner recently passed away. And what happened? That created a certain custody battle where it's now not clear who has custody over the children. Is it the father, or is it the wife's family and the grandmother on that side of the family? So there's a battle going on between 2 different sides of a family. On one side of the family is the Pastor Mboro side, and Pastor Mboro's nephew is the father. So clearly, they rolled up to the school to go and get the children because they knew they would be there, to effectively take over custody of the children, because presumably the children had been kept away from them. And I want to show you this first clip, and it's quite disturbing, of them actually going into the school. So it's Pastor Mboro, his security guard, more on whom later. And there's a third person who you can't see in this clip, who is the father of the children. And check out the intimidation of the school, the serious weapons that are used, and look at how this lit up social media. Have a watch.
Don't you dare! Don't you dare!
So after this crazy moment, I mean, South Africans are such a problem. Like, some people went on social media and started posting funny things like look at this picture, for example. South Africans, can you please take yourselves seriously? This is a serious matter, and you're now posting Pastor Mboro as Deadpool. Like, please come back to yourselves. But anyway, let's get back to the seriousness of the situation, because it really is shocking, atrocious, and quite serious. After this, they managed to extricate forcefully and through these acts of intimidation the children from the school. And so in this video, which comes later, you can actually see the images of them making away with the children. Have a look at this, which is the next part in the story. Just crazy. South Africa is a movie. Like, the pastor literally threatening people, waving the panga, like he's actually, if you're in its way, you're literally going to die. And I mean, the security guard, as for the security guard, like, I mean, what is the security guard actually doing? Like, funnily enough, he just walks around never actually using the weapon. I guess it's just there for intimidation, but it's like, if you wanted to intimidate, maybe the security guard would have been the better idea. But I just don't know exactly what his role was in this whole thing. But I mean, this is really quite shocking. Number one, you have the children in this situation. And just think about being at school, being a young child. I think they're in, some of them are before grade 1. The other one is in grade 2. The children around, the teachers, how traumatized they must have been. The children themselves, who are clearly showing that they don't want to be taken, or at least are crying and traumatized as they're being forcefully led out of the school. And just the onlookers and the people like walking by with these huge heavy duty guns and very warlike big pangas. It's just the kind of scene that you would expect to see in the middle of some kind of civil war, not a custody battle. Fam, I just wanted to interrupt this episode to let you know the 4 ways you can help SMWX. Way number 1, you can invite me to speak at your institution or company. Way number 2, you can advertise on this channel. Way number 3, you can become a member of this channel. The link to the membership is down below. And number 4, you can buy merch, that's books or hoodies. Now let's get back to the episode. All our contact details are in the description box below. So that's effectively what happened. Now, following that, we don't have a lot of images of the arrest, but we know that these 3 people who went to the school, so the father, Pastor Mboro, and the security guard, were then arrested, which is good, because it's clear to me that certain crimes, at least on the face of it, seem to have been committed. And let's talk about that, and let's talk about the law here. Because you have 2 concurrent potential crimes going on here. First, you have the crime of intimidation. And then secondly, you have the crime of assault, which are actually quite similar crimes. And many people don't realize that in terms of these crimes, you actually don't have to make physical contact with anyone to commit these crimes. So the first crime is intimidation. And in terms of intimidation, the elements of this crime are the unlawful and intentional threat to compel or induce someone to act or refrain from acting, right? So it's a threat to force someone to do something or refrain from doing something, right? Whereas assault, which is quite a similar but a distinct crime, is the unlawful and intentional, which is the same, application of force. So unlike intimidation, you have an application of force or a threat of such force on another person, right? So clearly here, with the weapons, the mere fact that they're there and that instructions are being made to compel people to do certain things like open the gates and bring the children, and the children against their will, it seemingly, you have elements of these crimes, and that's why they've been arrested for these particular crimes. Of course, in a court of law, things have to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt, and you can't always draw conclusion from social media videos, no matter how obvious they look. But on the face of it, I'm saying it would seem that the police are thinking about these kinds of crimes, and this is what has been reported as the crimes. And just in terms of legal knowledge, now that we're here, it's pretty interesting to note that even if you merely threaten to harm someone in a way that is intentional, in a way that induces them to do something, you can be found guilty of assault. And then intimidation is slightly different because you don't even have to threaten to harm their person. It could be an economic threat, it could be a psychological threat. But if a court finds that you had an intention to do that to compel them to do something else, that itself is a crime. So we're dealing with an interesting intersection here of law, of our education system, of charismatic churches and the figures within charismatic churches, and violence in South Africa. Throw all of that together with social media, and you have one of the most fascinating and shocking stories in South Africa that tells us so much about our country. So let's get back to the story. Pastor Mboro and company are arrested, but outside the court, it seems, although we don't have a lot of footage, or we don't have any footage of this yet, that the community then rises and tries to, in one news report, deal with the pastor for bringing this kind of violence into the school. And there is then a fourth person who is arrested who seems to have been someone who's been fighting back against this community attempt to bring the pastor to justice, and is also arrested. And so there seems to have been some kind of violent altercation in the process of arrest or bringing these arrested persons to the police station. So that's where the fourth person comes in, and you may have seen it reported that there are 4 people arrested. Have a look at Pastor Mboro's side of the story in this video, because what he tries to paint a picture of is that moment where the person that he was with is actually, according to him, physically assaulted in this process of the community trying to deal with those who brought this kind of violence into the school. Check this out.
Webster, Mrs. Webster, mobilize the teachers. This is the man who is my son. He has children. I even helped Batuba to bury that woman. Casket eba mupatileng kayona ki tšhelete ya mopolo. The toilets mo le ne le tšhelete ya mopolo. This is how they thank him. They attacked him and they destroyed him. And look what they have done, Kokoloing. They threw stones, destroying, attacking. This is what is happening. The cases were opened on Friday, on Friday. After coming, insulting me, insulting the very children. Their videos will show you. Babita di tloholo tsa ka di ratane. Babita calling the children of my son and him the ratane. They claim maintenance from me. I must give them money to maintain these children. They took their children. They can't even support them. They want money under them. But even the teachers, Obane, Miss Webster, oh, Munyabo Koko Zugul. She's teaching there, Ematsidis. Now I went to the car I said to my bodyguards, don't shoot. I will take the pangas. If they throw stones and now go where they shoot or bring deadly weapons, legally we have a right to shoot back. I said when they shoot, when they do, then we have in self-defense. But so far, we didn't shoot. I scared them with those pandas. Phela nami ngokwami ngiyicommand. Angadwa nje. Anginobulawa inkwenkwe, anginobulawa umgodoli. Now, they use iskolo. They call on children to close the gate. I had to run to get amapana for defense. What do you do when a journalist? When a police, when a politician, when an activist? If your son is locked in a school and beaten, what will you do? You will fight with everything that you can. What do you do if women keeps coming to your house and they harass you? They know I have bodyguards, they know I have guns, they do it so that they can go and open a case and say, we have a pointing with firearm. I had to go in that school to rescue my son. We fight for our own. We stick together. Even the members of my church, I stand with them.
So there we have his side of the story. However, what is not really spoken about there is, okay, even if you had a very serious custody battle, even if you were, let's assume you were treated completely inappropriately and you actually had a legal right to take custody of this child as the father, that doesn't justify the sheer amount of violence and intimidation that is used, especially when directed towards children in what should be a sacred space, being a school in South Africa. And that's the part that I think has just terrified and horrified so many people, the sheer use of these terrible weapons in a place where children shouldn't be seeing that kind of thing. So that explanation kind of deflects the attention to what happened outside the police station, whereas in actual fact, the key thing was, why go into the school like that in the first place, right? If you really wanted to use the law, you would actually get lawyers to help you if you believe that you truly did have the right to custody of the child. There are legal mechanisms to prove that and to compel the state to hand over custody, assuming you are right in the first place. But what happens after that? Well, yeah, the story's not done. Is that today, as I film this, Pastor Mboro's church in Katlehong now seems to have been set alight. So the community seems to have taken matters into their own hands, and it looks like very serious damage has been done to that church, and you can see some images here.
So the church of controversial pastor Pastor Mboro has been set alight here in Katlehong, and you can see what seems to be the chairs inside, and the entire structure just gutted in flames, of course, following that incident yesterday at the Matsidiso Primary School, where the pastor could be seen wielding a machete with two other men that were also armed during that attack. But you can see here the church really all up in flames here in Katlehong.
So, again, I mean, many people may jump up and say, yes, Pastor Mboro deserved that, but in my view, that just once again reinforces the cycle of violence that we have seen, and going outside the law and now damaging this whole church. This whole episode really tells us something profound about our society, that people have lost confidence in legal mechanisms, in law enforcement, in the usual channels to get their disputes resolved. And in extreme instances like this, which are admittedly rare, but still too common, South Africans are just taking matters into their own hands, whether that is burning someone's church or going into a school with a rifle and a security guard and pangas, right? And in some ways is representative of the failure of the South African state to provide security for South Africans. And South Africans have decided to take that security into their own hands. Now, sometimes they can do that lawfully in a way that protects themselves and their communities. And we know that acts of self-defense are lawful if your life is under threat. But what could go wrong? This kind of stuff could go wrong. Someone could just walk into a school with a crazy weapon, right? So in many ways, our state failure is creating self-help, and that self-help is turning our society from an already violent state into an even more violent state. So we've looked at some of the legal questions, we've looked at the story itself. Let's take a look at some of the fallout and some of the political reactions. The first thing we saw was a tweet from the Minister of Education, Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, really just condemning this violence in schools. We also heard from the Minister of Police, who had this to say.
Incident yesterday in a primary school in Katlehong. It's something that we condemn. When a community leader or a citizen carries what appears to be firearms and a bush knife, go to an institution like education for whatever reason, brandish such things like a panga, and cause commotion because that causes anxiety among children and among parents of other children. We condemn that, and we know that police are dealing with it. They've arrested 4 people, and we are hoping that more arrests will come as it becomes necessary. So that matter is being dealt with. The second matter that we want to deal with, which is current, is yesterday's incident in Khayelitsha, where police, on following suspects, they were met with gunfire when they identified the home where they needed to do a search. And they were met with gunfire, and they then had to defend themselves by firing back. And on doing so, they left a number of people dead, 5 dead, which increased in the course of time. I think it increased to 8. And then, other than that, they arrested others. Now, it's important that we mention this because I must mention 5 AK-47s were found there. AK-47s. Now, this is a very high caliber weapon. And it's related to war. You don't carry, it's not a knife. It's an AK-47, 5 of them. And then there was also an R1. There were also another assortment of weapons. And all in all, the group was around 20, if not 21, who were caught there. And all of them, on seeing police approaching, they responded by gunpower. Now, I read a newspaper called the Sunday Tribune, and I picked up 2 things there. There was a phrase that was used, I think, by the journalists who wrote that, talking about trigger-happy police. Trigger-happy police. They don't talk about trigger-happy criminals. They don't talk about trigger-happy other criminals other than those who get caught in sins, in crime sins that form the context thereof. A number of crime sins in the near past in KZN. And then they start raising those. We're in a democratic country. We accept different opinions in whatever situation you find. But I think media need to give police, South African police, space. We can't be complaining about everything. You complain about high rising or high levels of crime, and we condemn police for not acting. And when they act, and they get prevented from acting via shootings at them. And then when they protect themselves, defend themselves, and then we're the ones who come forward immediately. And we totally say nothing about communities that from time to time fall victim of such killing gangs. Nothing, absolutely nothing. About trigger-happy police. It's unfair. It is factually wrong. But we have identified those people who are raising concerns. We will meet them because we're in a democratic country. We're not just going to talk as we talk, but we'll meet them and say from which crime scene.
Well, it's all well and good for those in our government to condemn things when they happen. But our government can often just be too reactive. What has government done to prevent and make schools safe places? Why was it so easy for people to just roll up in those schools, knowing that there wouldn't be any law enforcement in any kind of reasonable radius of that kind of event? Education, infrastructure, schools, and the safety of South African children are all put on display here, and government's lack of capacity over many, many years to really secure school infrastructure, secure safe education for children, and indeed policing. We know in South Africa that policing, particularly in areas like Katlehong, in township areas, is woefully inadequate. Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel, so why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights. Now let's get back to it. We've also seen a number of things happening in our schools, and I think South African schools are a particularly interesting microcosm for our society right now. We've seen incidents of racism where black pupils were put in cages and faux auctioned off at a school in Cape Town. I think it was Pinelands. We've seen recent questions of Pretoria Girls High School, and a disciplinary committee found that there wasn't racism present, but it reopened a wound of questions of racism in South African schools because Pretoria Girls High School has been one of the key areas around which curriculum and hair policy have risen to the forefront, particularly driven by people like Zuleika Patel. And shout out to Zuleika Patel, who's been on this channel. I've interviewed her many times. So schools are really these flashpoints or melting pots for many of our society's challenges. And on the flip side, if we can create more safe, better schools, that will be a key indicator not just of education, but of the society itself. Violence in South Africa and how we resort to violence at the first opportunity, and how many people feel that violence is what will solve their problems. And quite frankly, sadly, it often does. But at what cost to society, and at what cost to the most vulnerable in our society, like children? So, this is a breakdown of what you may have seen on social media. You probably saw a whole bunch of videos, but I think it tells a deeper story of what happened at the school that day, and indeed a deeper story about our country. If this goes to court, we will, of course, hear the full story, and of course, those implicated will be able to share their side of the story, and any good criminal justice system allows accused persons to share their side of the story before an impartial court, and maybe we'll learn something that we didn't know before. But at present, it looks like a shocking case of violence entering schools and taking matters into one's own hands. Where are we as a country? Let me know what you think down below. What do you learn about the story? What do you think it tells us about the country? Is there anything I'm missing in the story? Is there any view that you think could be shared differently? I'm keen to hear your thoughts. Like, share, subscribe. Help us get to 200,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Help us hit our next milestone of 150,000 subscribers. Become a member of the channel, like, share, subscribe, share it on your WhatsApp group, share it on the family WhatsApp group, and see how they react to this story. Good having you aboard on SMWX again. Aye.